Unless you were living under a rock. You might remember how this one ended. My guy, Case Keenum, finding Stefon Diggs for the 61-yard game-winning touchdown as time expired. A little play that'll forever be remembered as the Minnesota Miracle. But if you ask Drew Brees, vengeance is not on his mind.
This is not a revenge game. There's not, listen, it's a different season. These are new teams, even though there's a lot of similar personnel, it's a new season, it's a new team, it's a new mindset, so listen, it's a very good opponent that we're playing on Sunday Night Football at their place. It's a tough environment, tough place to play. We understand we're going to need our best game, our best execution to win.
I get all that, and he's saying all the right words. But he was out there and watched this all happen. I got to believe there's some part of the Saints right now that just wants so badly to go out there and win this game.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it has the same implications as the game they played in the tournament last January. So from that, it's not the same degree in terms of the intensity of the matchup. But when I look at this game, you could be talking about a game that determines who has home field advantage if and when these two teams meet in the tournament this year. So, I mean, that's something that you have to look at. But on the field, how I expect this to play out, it's going to be strength on strength. It's the strength, the identity of the Minnesota Vikings is their defense. The identity of the New Orleans Saints is their offense. So it's how does that matchup play out? Who has the advantage in that matchup? If you look at the Vikings defense this year, it hasn't been the dominant defense that we know from a year ago in terms of total yardage and points. But what they have been is opportunistic in terms of being able to take the football away. In their 4 wins, they've got multiple takeaways. And the 3 games where they lost or tied, they don't have any takeaways. So this is a group that's dependent on being able to take the football away just because they haven't been whole as a defense. They've had some injuries that they've had to overcome. Sendeo has missed some games. Linval Joseph missed last week. Xavier Rhodes is banged up this week. So, I mean, this is a good week for that Minnesota Vikings defensive front to get Everson Griffin back because they're going to have to put some pressure on Drew Brees if they're going to try to minimize the effectiveness of that Saints passing attack.
Yeah, let's go back to what was the scouting report before they played in the playoffs. If we're going to come back to that, the scouting report then was Vikings top 5 defense. Saints got to be really, really careful with the football. We got to run the ball with the 2-headed monster as far as Ingram, Kamara. We're going to be able to do that, but we can't take too many chances offensively against that defense. Now they're playing this year. It's totally different. Defense has shown some leaks. They haven't been consistent pass rushing. Their defensive secondary. So I just believe Sean Payton. Now Drew Brees, he's moved on. But Sean Payton is a guy to keep a grudge. He won't forget. A memory like an elephant. Sean Payton remembers what happened. And he's that kind of guy with that type of personality, that edginess that he takes the field trying to get some of that revenge, realizing this game is really important as far as the Saints' future. The momentum they created, they don't want to be able to lose that in Minneapolis. So the Saints feel like they match up better, and this could be more of a shootout compared to a defensive struggle, which it was in the playoff game.
Last year's playoff game, it wasn't just a wild final play. There were 4 lead changes in the final 4 minutes of that football game. It was one of the wildest sequences back and forth in the end of the 4th quarter of any playoff game I can remember. But last year's playoff game also there's this line of demarcation. This Vikings defense was different the whole season up until the first half of that playoff game and what it's been since then. The second half of the playoff game against the Saints, you started leaking. The next game they played, they got shredded by Nick Foles. And this year, they have not yet fully found their footing. The reason they can be 4-2-1 without the dominant defense they had last year, even if they still have the same personnel, is because their passing attack has been excellent. And that's where I think the Vikings have a decided edge this weekend, is it's their strength on the Saints' weakness when it comes to the Vikings passing game against the Saints' pass defense. Saints, I believe, have the 30th ranked pass defense right now, which is surprising because last year with the 2 rookies, the rookie safety who made the bad play, Marcus Williams, and then we know the rookie, defensive rookie of the year, whose name I'm forgetting, Marshawn Lattimore. You thought those 2 guys would take a step forward in year 2. They have not even maintained their level from year 1, at least throughout this point of the season. So that's where I think a game in Minnesota that is very important to both teams, but really I think a little more important to Minnesota in this regard. They have no cushion in their division like the Saints have. have. I think if Kirk Cousins can play the way he's played the last few weeks, if Adam Thielen can continue on this unreal pace, to me, that tips the scales in the Vikings' favor.
So let me get this right. You think it's a good idea for the Vikings to get in a shootout with Drew Brees and the Saints?
I think it's the only way they can win.
Styles make fights.
Styles make fights. Here's the one thing I will say. Mike Zimmer called this Saints offense indiscriminate, meaning that they will go after anybody using any of their skill position players at any single time. So I have a hard time believing that this Vikings defense is going to hold Drew Brees in check. This is a different animal than they've gone against the last couple of weeks, going against Josh Rosen in the Arizona Cardinals and Sam Darnold in the New York Jets. This is a completely different offense, and I don't know that these guys are going to be up for that task, particularly with the injuries on the back end. You got to know that Drew Brees is going to go after Xavier Rhodes, and if he doesn't play, he's going to go after his backup. We'll see how they hold up in coverage on the back end. But let's not discount this New Orleans Saints running game, because they can run the football as well. And if they're able to have that kind of balance, it's going to be tough to slow down this offense to keep them from scoring points. And as much as I like Kirk Cousins, I don't trust him to be able to match points with Drew Brees in that Saints offense.
Well, the one consistent offensive weapon the Vikings have had has been Adam Thielen. How do you approach this game? How do you stop a guy like Adam Thielen?
Well, when the guy's in a zone like he's in, 7 straight 100-yard games, when you design the game plan, there's a certain quadrant in that game plan designed on getting him in matchups against this secondary. I don't believe they can cover him. If the Saints play as much man-to-man as they did on Thielen, you can expect him to get another 100-yard game. But I just believe also with the lack of coverage people at their linebacker, watch Cal Rudolph, the tight end. And as soon as you start concentrating too much on them, then you have Stephon Diggs. He ends up having a big game. So their passing game has what has led the Vikings this season. The Vikings, since the Purple People Eaters, since then when they were a good team, they were an offensive team, a passing team. And that's what this year's 2018 version is. Regardless of what people want to think, regardless of where else the roster, they are a passing football team, and Adam Thielen is one of the best in the business.
I understand Dalvin Cook's been dinged up and he hasn't looked like what he looked like in his brief stint last year before he hurt his knee. But why do you guys think the Vikings have been so ineffective rushing the football? That they've been very good passing the football, but it's also been out of necessity. They have not been able to find any consistent rushing attack.
It's the injuries up front on the offensive line. I mean, they're missing Eason. I mean, Compton has had some issues. He's been in and out of the lineup. I mean, their offensive line as a whole hasn't been together since the first couple of weeks of the season. So I think that has an effect on the run game. Now, you would think that that would be a liability in terms of being able to protect Kirk Cousins, but that hasn't been the case, and Cousins has been able to manipulate the pocket enough to be efficient in the passing game. But when you look at what Drew Brees is doing this season, 77% completion percentage, it's on pace for right at 5,000 yards, 13 touchdowns, but CC, no interceptions.
Yeah.
That's why I always give the edge to the Saints if this comes down to whose offense can score the most points in terms of being effective when they have those possessions.
Yeah, a little inconsistency as far as the offensive line. Also, in this new era of lack of practicing, it's hard to develop that continuity. So you have injuries, but the number one reason is lack of talent. The offensive line for the Vikings is an undersized, small, positional offensive line. So they do a decent job in pass protection, but as far as being big and be able to force their will on a defense, they aren't built that way. And Dalvin Cook coming off that knee injury, a lot of players struggle with their hamstrings in trying to re-strengthen that knee. So he's had problems with that hamstring. That's given him more problems than the knee. But that really explains why their offensive line and why they've struggled being able to try to force their will on the defense.
We should mention Vikings tight end Kyle Rudolph will join us coming up in a little bit. Can he stick around? On the other side, Blake Bortles knows he's the scapegoat in Jacksonville, but is it really all his fault? That's next on First Things First.
Isn't the scapegoat someone who gets blamed who doesn't deserve it?
Yes, that's what